We're live.
Artis, would you begin your recording, please?
PC recording is up.
Good morning and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Contracts. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video? To minimize disruption, please silence your electronic devices. And if you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at the following address: testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Thank you for joining the virtual hearing today. I would like to acknowledge that we've been joined by our colleagues. I see Councilmember Holden, Councilmember Lee, Councilmember Brewer, and I think that's it for now. Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual hearing of Contracts Committee of the New York City Council. Today is Thursday, February 17th, 2022. My name is Julie Won, council member of the 26th District, and I have the privilege of chairing the Contracts Committee. I would like to extend my thanks to the members of the committee as well as the Comptroller's Office for joining us and holding this virtual hearing. I would like to thank the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, also known as MOCS, for doing its part in engaging with the Council and Comptroller Lander's Office so quickly into the new term. This hearing will provide the committee with its first opportunity in the new council session to hear publicly from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services regarding the Procurement and Sourcing Solutions Portal, also known as Passport. Passport has been MOC's flagship initiative since inception several years ago. It was conceived as an online procurement portal designed to create visibility into city contracting, improve collaboration between agencies and vendors, and facilitate the timely registration of awarded contracts. In the years since, Passport's provider experience has informed 3 major releases to the Passport system, which we hope to discuss today. Passport's digital interface was designed to allow vendors to track the progress of their contracts, offer agencies insight into the capabilities of specific vendors, and allow those agencies to expedite the process of determining vendor responsibility, a critical component for contractors working with our city. The first phase of Passport was launched back in the summer of 2017 and gave vendors and the council a taste of what we would expect for this new online procurement portal. Passport's release 1 permitted contractors to file their vendor questionnaires electronically, identify areas of expertise, and allowed vendors to review their performance evaluations on prior contracts. The goal was to encourage vendors to improve their deliverables in the expectation of being awarded future city contracts. Passport's Release 2 was launched in April 2019 and built upon Release 1 by allowing electronic vendor invoicing and the creation of an online catalog of vendor goods that vendors could update in real time. Agencies were then able to shop vendor catalogs directly with up-to-date access to vendor inventory. Release 3 was launched in late 2020, and it let city contractors sign contract paperwork electronically via digital signatures, and most importantly, lets them track contract progress online directly through a milestone tracker. The milestone tracker outlines the steps required to have an award completed. Vendors can log into Passport and see where their contracts lie within the contracting process and what remains to be done to complete their contract awards. Vendors can also search through Passport for all of the city's active solicitations and see which ones they might be able to offer a bid. While these updates were well received by the vendor community, there are still many outstanding vendor concerns that were outlined in the Mayor and Comptroller's Task Force report. Some of these suggestions include expanding the information available in the milestone tracker to include more relevant information about the contract, offering regular training for agency contracting officers to create standard processes across agencies, eliminating reliance on older agency legacy systems to prevent duplicative work, and integrating non-mayoral agencies onto the Passport platform. While Passport offers a modern type of city procurement that is far cry from fax machines and paper filings, we can always strive to do better. We look forward to hearing from Mox, the controller, and the vendor community today as we publicly address these challenges together. Before we move to testimony, I would like to thank my committee staff, Committee Counsel Alex Polinoff, Policy Analyst Leah Skripiak, and Finance Unit Head John Russell for all their hard work putting this hearing together. With that said, I will now turn over the floor to our moderator, Committee Counsel Alex Polinoff, to go over some procedural items. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Wan. As the chair mentioned, I'm Alex Polinoff, counsel to the Contracts Committee of the New York City Council. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called upon to testify, at which point you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify in order, so please listen for your name to be called. The first panelist to give testimony today will be the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, Lisa Flores. Both First Deputy Director Ryan Murray and Chief Technology Officer Brandon Chiazza from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services will also be available today for questioning. I will call on each of you shortly when it is time to begin your testimony. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question of the administration or of a specific panelist, please use the Zoom raise hand function and I will call on you in the order you raised your hand. We will be limiting council member questions to 3 minutes, which includes the time it takes to answer those questions. Please note that for the ease of this virtual hearing, we will not be allowing a second round of questions for each panelist outside of the committee chair. All hearing participants should submit their written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov no later than 72 hours after the conclusion of the hearing. Before we begin testimony, I will administer the oath. To all members of the administration who will be offering testimony today or will be available for questions, please raise your right hands now. I will call on each of you individually for a response. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee today, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Director Flores.
I do.
First Deputy Director Murray.
Well,
I'm sorry, you broke up there.
but I will. Committee Counsel.
Thank you. Thank you. Chief Technology Officer Chiazza.
I do.
Thank you. Director Flores, you may begin your testimony now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wan and members of the Contracts Committee, and congratulations to those of you who were recently sworn into office. My name is Lisa Flores, and I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. And I am honored to be here with all of you who are part of a historic women majority-led city council. As you know, MOX is an oversight agency charged with facilitating and monitoring the city's $30 billion annual procurement ecosystem. Central to this mission over the past 4 years has been the implementation of digital tools and practices to bring greater transparency, accountability, and standardization to the procurement process. The Procurement and Sourcing Solutions Portal, or Passport, is a cloud-based software as a service application MOX has put into place through technical design, widespread change management, and iterative system releases to serve as the city's central hub for doing business. I'm happy to share that as the new administration takes over, Passport is now firmly established as the city's digital contracting system. Before we dig into the details around Passport, I want to step back and share my personal story to put this project into proper context. I served as Deputy Director at MOX for 7 years and then served as a Deputy Controller for Contracts for the past 8 years. When I left MOX, the procurement process was still mostly conducted through paper with manual data entry of forms into the city's Vendex system by our small staff and piles of paper being carted between agencies in the Controller's office for registration. To say the least, it was not a hospitable environment for doing business with the city. As I will cover more later in the testimony, Passport is in many ways a prerequisite to solving some of our problems in procurement, because it gives us a complete visibility into the process that we have lacked for so long. As I return to MOX and a formerly paper process has been fully digitally transformed, I'm excited to keep going forward with procurement reform. To give a brief history of the Passport rollout, we modeled this system off similar successes we've seen in the human services space with Accelerator. Passport was implemented in successive phases to build familiarity with the system and expand the network of users. The first two releases replaced the old Vendex system and introduced goods catalogs, which brought process efficiencies in several vendor-related tasks. The next and the largest phase, Release 3, digitized the full procurement process from sourcing to contract registration for agencies and vendors, allowing procurement staff to release solicitations, evaluate proposals, make award determinations, and author contracts before submitting to registration in one integrated platform. Vendors likewise can now find opportunities to do business with the city in one single portal, submit proposals, and if selected, complete all tasks necessary to move a contract to registration in this platform. This was a game changer for New York City, which brought enhanced transparency, process efficiencies, and an array of new tools for agency procurement staff. MOX put an emphasis on making sure that MWBEs and small not-for-profits were prioritized for support in the early phases of Release 3, in keeping with the goal of eliminating barriers to entry and leveling the playing field for all groups who want to do business with the city. Our current focus in Release 4 is bringing financials into the system, with agencies transitioning existing financial activities into Passport as we speak. Passport has now delivered on our mission to provide an end-to-end digital platform for procurement with some key achievements thus far. Over 30,000 vendors are in the system. Over 21,000 have filed the necessary paperwork to be ready to compete for contracts. The timelines for completing vendor disclosure forms have decreased from weeks and months in the paper process of Vendex days into just a matter of days now in Passport. Over 4,000 solicitations have been released. Over 6,700 contracts and continuations registered with the controller were procured through Passport, and nearly 1.7 million workflow tasks have been completed since Release 3 go live. We also have a roadmap on updates to the Passport system, which I have shared with your office in anticipation of the hearing. And some of the key features in the next phases include functionality to enable vendors to manage their contract budget in system, bringing capital project management into Passport, enhancing the ability to oversee and report on subcontractor work, and routine platform upgrades. Taken together, these upgrades will continue to further consolidate and centralize procurement-related activities into one system, making it easier for vendors to do business through a single digital portal, and implement tweaks and fixes requested by specific agencies to better align the system to their contracting workflows. Given the complex and constantly evolving nature of procurement in New York City, we expect that future releases will be needed to maintain the system, and we will be sure to keep the committee apprised of these developments as they continue. Our team has learned valuable lessons from the progress we've made so far that continue to guide us in the reforms that lie ahead. The most important part of any major process transformation is the people, culture, and change management. We've completed hundreds of trainings, posted thousands of pages of material, and responded to thousands of help desk tickets to make sure that our users have the knowledge and tools they need to complete their work. This feedback, in turn, helps our technical team to prioritize fixes and enhancements and improve the system. Similarly, our experience with Passport and procurement oversight in general has highlighted the importance of the simple but necessary step of planning procurement in advance and starting early. Procurement is sometimes considered an afterthought when designing initiatives, but we have put the tools and awareness in place for leaders across the city to put procurement at the forefront of strategic planning decisions. For the next phase of procurement in the city, reorienting our organizational processes and taking a close look at the procurement regulatory structure will be even more important than the next set of technical updates ahead of us. The end goal of digitizing the procurement system was never just that. It was a starting place for managing performance, making sure all relevant parties see and understand the procurement process, and building a more strategic orientation to New York City procurement. Now, as we take stock of the new administration's priority initiatives, we can see how procurement data plugs in to support citywide decision-making, such as using data to drive efficiency and performance management, partnering with the controller to reduce burdens on not-for-profits, and assessing areas of improvement in the capital and technology procurement verticals. Indeed, we have seen improvements for some of these initiatives playing out already. The Joint Task Force on Not-for-Profits that was established between the incoming Adams administration and Controller Lander has developed a set of specific recommendations that will speed up contract registration and payment for not-for-profits, standardize practice across agencies, and organize and staff the newly established Office of Non-for-Profits. The task force also calls on the administration, controller, and city council to collaborate in identifying ways to alleviate the burdens on small nonprofits in the city discretionary contracting process. And we look forward to working with you to improve this process. Another immediate output of our dialogue with the task force will be the publication of dashboards to show vendors, non-for-profits, elected officials, and the public where contracts stand in the registration process and how an agency's portfolio is progressing through registration. We believe this will be another game changer for New York City procurement because it will give all parties a clear and accurate picture into where contract portfolios stand, allow us to benchmark performance, and create new opportunities to evaluate procurement practices and build reforms. We look forward to sharing further information on this initiative with the committee as we get closer to launch. Similarly, Passport now places us in an advantageous position to reevaluate the city's MWBE program and find ways to continue expanding on the gains we have seen thus far. Local Law 1 MWBE utilization for fiscal year 2021 saw a slight dip from the previous year's peak, going from 27.9% to 25.3% during this period. And while this represents a welcome improvement from as recently as 5 years ago, there is still much work to be done. The disparity within the disparity still persists. For example, Black women-owned firms have a disparately low utilization rate. Meanwhile, delays in the contract registration and payment timelines make it difficult for MWBEs to float the capital necessary to compete on city contracts when they're not being paid in a timely manner. We're aware of these challenges and look forward to working with our partners and the City Council on devising solutions. In closing, I would like to thank you for inviting us to testify today on this key initiatives as we kick off this new term together. And I want you to know that our office prides itself on transparency. So if any members of the committee have questions, you can always reach out to me or my team. And similarly, if there are any vendors or non-for-profits listening in on today's hearing and you're having problems with a contracting issue, please reach out to us. We're always available to help. I'm joined by First Deputy Director Ryan Murray and Chief Technology Officer Brandon Chiazza, and we'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Flores. I will now turn it over to questions from the chair. Panelists from the administration, please stay unmuted if possible during this question and answer period. And a reminder to Chair Wan that you will be in control of muting and unmuting yourself during this period. Chair Wan, you may begin.
Thank you. Before I begin questions, I just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Nurse and Ariola, as well as Councilmember Giannara, have also joined. Thank you so much for joining. So to begin questioning, the first question I have is, what measures are you taking to ensure you integrate feedback and evaluation from all of your Passport users?
Thank you for that question, Chair. So we have continuous conversations and open dialogue with our agencies and sector partners. And so that's an ongoing process, which, as I mentioned in my testimony, is partly where the office has received ideas and feedback that have been inputted to releases and changes based on the requests that we've received. But in this transition period, the new administration and with the non-for-profit task force findings and recommendations, it definitely offers us an opportunity to sort of double down and refocus on making sure that we're offering different modes of communication with our partners. So for example, right now, some of the leaders from my team are having their monthly meeting with the agency chief contracting officers, where we're beginning to engage with them around our goals and our values and mission for what we want to achieve as it relates to equity and procurement and other goals. But also in the coming weeks, we're going to kick off some timed sessions with agencies around sort of the same industry to get their feedback that will inform processes going forward. And I'm really excited, as I mentioned earlier this week in the announcement for the nonprofit task force, that this structure of us working with the controller and constantly having feedback from partners both at City Hall and from the non-for-profit sector will be an ongoing conversation that will inform not just changes to potentially Passport, but more importantly and equally important is potentially reforming procurement rules and processes, which is, the passport tool is sort of works towards achieving the steps that are required in the rules. Well, we look forward to hearing any ideas as we work with you on if, you believe that there's an area that we necessarily haven't touched. This is definitely the perfect opportunity for us to begin engaging and have those open lines of communication.
Thank you, Lisa. I know that it's been great since the last report was released from the task force for the nonprofits, especially the human services, but I know that it's a small subset of the many nonprofits that make up our city, as well as the vendors and other participants that use Passport. So for everyday users, is there a way that they can provide feedback? Is there a formal process? Is there a survey? Is there a net promoter score that's being collected?
So thank you for that question, Chair. And so I'll start and then maybe pass off to Ryan. So we do have an infrastructure where we have a service desk so that we're constantly actually getting questions, and it might be I'm stuck on this screen, I need help, or it might be other sorts of questions that come up that relate to procurement and not necessarily the system itself. And so we have a system of tracking those questions to not only respond quickly, but then look at those questions to inform, are we seeing a pattern? Are we seeing the same types of questions that maybe we weren't aware are issues that we need to address? But right now we're actually going through the process internally of kind of looking at our avenues of communication and seeing where we need to potentially expand to make sure we're touching more grassroots BIPOC organizations that, don't necessarily are not necessarily part of an umbrella group, are not necessarily, funded with a lobbyist, but who engage obviously with procurement. So again, I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to add on to many of the tools that we already have in place. But if I may allow Ryan to add to anything that I may have missed of the sort of consistent engagement that we have.
Thank you, Director Flores, and thanks for the question, Chair One. The director covered most of it. I think the one thing I would add here is that we do actually have a survey that we have in place for folks who interact with us on any given day. The director shared that we have interactions, service desk tickets, people who need help on any given day are interacting with our staff. At the end of that, there is an opportunity for folks to give us direct feedback via survey. And the kinds of questions that keep popping up is also a place where we are able to then think about, do we upgrade the materials that we have available to guide folks, or is there an opportunity here to put in enhancements in place for the system? So we do have a score that happens. We've been consistently in the 80s in terms of our net promoter, if you will. There's nuance to this, as you know, Chair, in terms of net promoter scores, but we get that feedback every time there's an interaction and someone feels compelled to complete the survey. You get either folks who are extremely happy or folks who have very specific things that need to change. But as the director said, this is an opportunity now for us to do another push, because not everyone who has an interaction with us, or not everyone who uses the system actually needs help. And there might be folks in community who are only using Passport or only interacting with procurement minimally. We want to hear those voices too. The folks who are used to, whether they're sophisticated in terms of have a department that's about grants management, or it's that one executive director, folks probably routinely have multiple contracts. We want to hear from folks who are not used to working with the city or who have still not interacted with us. And that's where the grassroots effort is going to be in the next few months. And we look forward to partnering with council to really get some more robust feedback from the unusual suspects, as they say.
Got it. I would love to see in the future a direct way to give feedback or an evaluation directly on the Passport platform itself, as well as a way for users to provide feedback, whether it's through a chatbot or whatever it may be, so that you can do it directly without calling in. Language accessibility issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think absolutely, Chair. As we, I think, mentioned just a moment when we met yesterday, we are working on soon releasing sort of a beta version of dashboard and information publicly, which we specifically going to allow and encourage for whether it's council members or taxpaying folks from the public, people engaged with the city, to provide feedback to us on what other data they think is useful to hold the city accountable. So I think some of the ideas that you just mentioned, we can definitely incorporate as it relates to their experience and ideas with Passport, the system itself.
Yeah, because I think that, thank you so much, Lisa and Ryan, because the first question that I just asked is more about, it would probably pertain more to the procurement process itself, as you were saying, when you get feedback.
Yeah.
My second question is, what is the process for improving the actual user experience of the user interface itself? And how is that experience integrating the design, the feedback that you're getting from improving user experience being integrated into design and development process? So are you guys using agile development, or are you using something else, waterfall?
So I if I may, Chair, start and then definitely tag in either Ryan or our Chief Technology Officer. One of the really important parts of the sort of infrastructure of MOX now that was very different from what MOX looked like 8 years ago when I was here, is that there, with Passport and the team that's been built here at MOX, there's a really cross-functional work that happens on a daily basis because Passport is somewhat equivalent to the city's financial management system. It's a system of record for procurement for mayoral agencies. And so it's really important that not just looking at changes or input from a technical perspective, but how does that relate to the actual business process and the user experience? So that's sort of how we're formulated here in a very integrated way. But to your direct question about agile or waterfall, if I may ask Brandon Chiazza to chime in.
Sure. And thank you, Chair, for the question. So as Director Flores mentioned, we do have a large cross-functional team at MOX that is, people first, everybody welcome approach. And we want to be able to collect, both enhancements, any issue identification through their engagements with agencies, vendors, and potentially with the public. And so through that mechanism, we internally have a IT steering committee that basically is the planning process for our agile type approach to releases on our maintenance path. So when we talk about Passport, we have 2 channels for releases. It's really a maintenance path. And then we have a project path. And so on our maintenance path, we're releasing 3 releases a week. And you can't do that without careful planning, without direct business and cross-functional teams. And so we achieve a pretty rapid throughput that is really akin to an agile type of approach. On our project path, we do use a bit of a waterfall methodology because those releases tend to be larger, require large-scale security accreditation and performance testing sign-offs from our technology partners at Office of Technology and Innovation in order to proceed. So there are clear sort of exits and phases to sort of achieve that.
Got it. Thank you. What are the top 5 collective pain points from the vendors that you're constantly hearing in your feedback, and how are they being addressed?
Top 5. So I'll start, and then I'll obviously, if I don't know if we have enumerated the top 5, but I will say from, I think what I have heard, specifically, I think most recent in my mind, again, I think the work of the non-for-profit task force that was very deliberate and very comprehensive. I think sometimes is attributed, or barriers or difficulties attributed to Passport because that's a system that they're working in to complete procurement actions. But some of the findings, for example, in the not-for-profit task force, were not limited to the system itself. For example, you may have seen in the report that vendors said that they went with one agency and there was set of processes or documents, and then they have a contract with another agency and there seems to be a separate or very different set of document required or processes. And that's not attributed to Passport, that's attributed to whether or not we have done enough thus far in standardizing the processes that exist within an agency that are layered on top of the procurement rules. So I think some of them sort of are presented as if they're Passport issues, but there's usually sort of an intertwine of frustration of in dealing with agency processes or the rules and having to go into the system, and it conflates the issue at some point. But I'm not sure if Ryan or Brandon, if we have sort of top five.
Great question. I'll add, I think that as the director shared, it's hard to navigate. Folks still, although we might lay out exactly what's next in the process, there's nuance to that. And by agency, by contract type, based on the kinds of actions that folks have specifically in place for an amendment to a certain contract, folks are frustrated when the requirements, not necessarily just the process, aren't as clear as they can be, or they vary. And there's sometimes good reasons why there's variability in what's needed in a contract. It's a contract and it might be specific to a program, but there's an opportunity, as the Nonprofit Task Force has said, for standardization. So in response, one of the things that we've done already, because I don't know what's next, I don't know where things are, we've made the milestones, and we went over it with you, Chair Juan, and happy to provide a demo to the entire committee at some point, individually or as a group. There's certain milestones, not all are sequential, some can be done in parallel. Folks wanting to know, well, not just what are they, but frankly and logically, well, when did they start? How long has it been moving and open? I'm looking at a few people who are on here, like Michelle Jackson and some folks from ACEC, right? This has been a complaint for years and years. So now you know when it starts, so that solves one problem, but now the requirements underneath that are challenging for folks to navigate. The other major thing I think that continues to be an issue for our colleagues in various sectors is the timing of procurements, right? We often hear feedback that, we need more collaboration in the design of procurement, RFPs typically for the human services space, that, while you might release an RFP and there is a concept paper and there's an opportunity at a pre-proposal conference to give feedback, not enough, because there's already a particular program design that is in place. So the collaboration, the process to get to what is implemented on the ground outside of negotiating a scope and budget is another really big area. That's, as Director Flores shared, that's independent of a Passport in the system. It's about approach and timing. So I think there's a reset opportunity across the board for how initiatives are implemented, and the technology can be facilitative in that, but there needs to be a different practice in terms of how you get to the RFP so that it feels more timely, feels more collaborative. That is a big issue.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there's a lot of transfer of frustrations on the process itself than Passport, the platform itself.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, there are always opportunities for improvement. So I definitely don't want to suggest that we're saying everything is perfect every single day. I think there is a general frustration with the overall procurement process, not knowing where your contract is, getting new scope added to your contract through an amendment that then gets delayed, not having a sense of how long each step in the process takes. Your contract's getting registered late and then you don't get paid on time, right? So there's very long-standing pressure points in the procurement process. And again, using the system, I think folks definitely feel like the system should be the panacea to fix all things for procurement, but it's a system, it's a tool. It's not the rules and regulations and that's why I think right now we're sort of at a really important place and exciting place that we've never really been before, and that we have data from a system that helps inform sort of where there are issues in the procurement process, and we have the will from the controller's office and from the mayor's office in collaboration to really tackle the endemic underlying problems in procurement that really have to do with processes, regulations, and rules.
Got it. What are the languages available on Passport on the user interface?
Great question. Brandon or Ryan? I think Brandon's, can you unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Brandon's
There you go.
unmuted now.
Thank you.
There you go. sir.
Yeah, so the product, as we mentioned, was a cloud-based SaaS product. It has the capabilities of more languages should we want to implement, but right now the language that is there is English.
Are there plans in the future releases for other languages to be enabled?
Well, so right now, Chair, we don't have it in the already scoped releases, but I'm hearing that's something that in discussion with you and other committee members that we should definitely figure out if we should be looking at that or turning on functionality that may exist that's not turned on in future releases that are not scoped yet.
Okay, and then for Passport training itself that you all are conducting, what languages are available for the trainings?
So my understanding that the trainings would be in English, but obviously there's access to other languages. I'm not sure that it's been requested before. Maybe Brandon or Ryan would know if it's been requested before. And if it hasn't been requested before and there's a particular need, especially as we focus on not just the vendor community and partners that we normally interact with, but very small grassroots organizations, whether they're businesses or not-for-profits, we really are hoping that in partnering not only with the council, but also potentially partnering with our other sister agencies such as SBS, who has Workforce One centers and small business centers, and other agencies that have spaces out in the boroughs, that we could potentially start to do things at a smaller scale that's very targeted. And if that approach that's very targeted requires us to have a specific language for that particular smaller setting, then I think we definitely want to make sure that we're doing that in an appropriate way and very targeted to reach folks that maybe have not normally engaged with our office.
Okay, so to confirm, both the product itself and the trainings are currently only in English. The next question I have is Passport now contains a milestone tracker, which I think is great, where vendors can follow the progress of their contracts. And if there is a holdup, who can vendors contact to address their issue?
So there's multiple, communication channels. As I mentioned earlier, we do have the service desk. So we do get through the service desk some of those types of questions. We also, obviously, vendors interact with their specific agencies. So there are contracting managers at each agency. I think also what's going to be pretty exciting, especially in the near future, as we talk about not-for-profits in particular, as you know, that the administration will, as a result of council legislation from the last administration, the non-for-profit office in the next few weeks and months will be forming, and they will have the ability, in addition to the work that we do here in agencies, to engage directly with vendors as another resource. And obviously the Office of MWBE and other offices within the city receive questions that then get provided to us or that we interact with that agency. But I think something that we also want to explore with our sister agencies is somewhat of a one platform, one voice vendor roadmap. If you're doing business with the city, you may not know to go to Mox's website to find some information. You might go to SBS's website. You may go to ACS because your website because you're thinking you're going to contract with ACS, but you're not necessarily getting the full picture of the procurement process from end to end and consistent information across every website that you may go to. So something that we have in our sites for the near future is working with our sister agencies and sort of creating sort of a one voice vendor roadmap that gets updated in tandem with one another if there's updates to particular points in the process. So anywhere you go, wherever your point of entry may be, that you're getting the same information, consistent and accurate information. And that's also a place that we should definitely make sure that we have access through different languages as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know for the some agencies are not fully have not fully adopted Passport. So when you're a vendor interacting with specific agencies and you're calling a specific contracting manager in that agency, do those contracting managers all have admin access to Passport where they can see where the problem may be within the system for them?
So I definitely, in terms of access, I'll let Brandon or Ryan jump in a minute, but so right now, all of the mayoral agencies are using Passport to most of their contracts, if not all of their contracts. As you may or may not know, for example, DOE was not part of the original scope of Passport, so they have some of their contracts going through the system now, and perhaps in the future and during discussions and implementation from the not-for-profit task force, there'll be an opportunity to have more DOE contracts in the system. There are non-mayorals, obviously, who are not in the system for a number of reasons, but may be a future state. NYCHA, for example, or H&H, they do not follow the city's procurement rules, and they're also not mayoral agencies, right? So they might be an authority, they might be sort of a quasi-state city agency, and so they have specific rules and regulations that they must follow. So the original scope did not include non-mayoral agency procurement processes. However, those non-mayoral agencies do go into Passport, and their vendors go into Passport to do their required vendor filings. So those agencies are able to see the vendor information in Passport. I'll let Ryan or Brandon jump in anything that I missed.
No, thank you, Director Flores. I mean, that was, pretty encompassing of what the scope of Passport is and potential for new agencies to be incorporated. Just adding to the second question that you had asked, which is about, an agency being able to have visibility into what's going on and address issues. I think that's exactly it. Transparency around Passport and the data and the process was one of the key principles behind its development. And for the first time, both vendors can see who is working on a contract and come to a digital portal and see that as well, and address and contact their agency representative directly. But also agencies can now see across the many contracts that they might be working on at a given time and see who's owning a particular task, identify if there's a bottleneck, and address it directly.
Thank you. To build on that, it appears Passport was designed to support the mayoral agencies like Lisa had listed and described. How much time and resources are needed to enhance the system to allow for broader use by non-mayoral agencies, like the ones that you just used as examples for Council, DOE, H&H, and NYCHA?
So I think again, I'll start being the not the CTO, and then hand it off to CTO or Ryan, the first deputy, if they have something to add. But so I think to be responsible and prudent in doing that type of work, I don't want to draw a price tag out of my head. As you know, definitely better than I do, sort of the design and the scoping process is really important to, having a system that actually fits the business needs of the organization. I think we may be able sort of come up with some thought, an estimate at a future date about DOE, since we started putting some of DOE contracts into the system. As it relates to the non-mayorals, though, as we've said, every phase and every release, we've taken a lot of input from agency users and from vendor users and from oversights. And they're all operating in the same ecosystem as it relates to the foundation of the rules, right? And even though the DOE is not covered under the charter, it's covered under New York State education law, their procurement rules, while they do diverge from the city mayoral agency's rules, they don't diverge drastically. There are some commonalities in those rules. When it comes to NYCHA and to H&H, that's not the case. It also is that NYCHA, for example, only a small percentage of their overall contracting budget is city money. So there's a lot of factors there. For example, they do not do their non-city funded contracting actions in the city's financial management system, right? So we don't really have the same window into their portfolio, their transactions. So that's a long answer to say, I don't think we have enough information to say how much that would cost. And we'd want to make sure that we would build something that doesn't necessarily impact negatively the mayoral agencies and try to change their processes to fit a non-mayoral that has a completely different set of rules and structure.
So Lisa, is the plan or the vision in the future to see non-mayoral agencies utilize Passport, or you are unsure at this time?
I'm sorry, Chair, can you repeat the first part of the question? I apologize.
So is it part of the vision for Passport to integrate non-mayoral agencies to use Passport in the future for NYCHA, DOE, EDC, et cetera, or is that unclear?
Well, as I said, right now, the non-mayoral agencies can and do use Passport for the purposes of vendor filings. So in the past, even before we had Passport, it was Vendex. NYCHA had their vendors complete Vendex. They were using the city's Vendex system, even though they were not using the same rules for the procurement portion of the system. So the same happens now in that non-mayoral agencies do have their vendors fill out their filings through the Passport. So for that functionality, everyone's using Passport. As it relates to their procurement processes, as you saw by the recommendations in the task force report, and that just covers human services, doesn't cover the other portion of capital, for example, and construction. There's a lot to be done in the near future to address sort of everyone's concerns and desires there. So I don't think it's off the table, but it's not on our immediate sort of path at this moment.
Is the Comptroller's Office also using Passport?
At this time, they are not using Passport. When an agency completes their process in Passport, the registration documents are sent over to the controller through an interface from Passport to their document workflow system, which is called Oasis. However, it's very exciting that, as you saw in the recommendations from the task force, that is one of the main recommendations for the Comptroller's Office. And I know the Comptroller Lander is very excited, even before being sworn into being part of Passport. So that is something that we will be working very closely to scope out that work and for them to be on the Passport system as well.
Great. And then just one last question, going back to the milestone tracker. Is there any information not contained in the milestone tracker that vendors have expressed interest in including?
That's a good question, Chair. I to my knowledge, at this point, not that I know of, but we have recently sort of put out some of the functionality that you saw, and we have put out notifications to users of Passport. Last month, we also showed the agency contracting officers and CFOs at agencies what this functionality looked like, so they would also know what their vendors were able to see now. But I do think that over time, that if we receive input, it's definitely something we would consider adding information if it's necessary, and something that's really helpful for the vendor community. And if you and your staff and others on the committee are hearing specific information about that tracker, we'd love to take that feedback.
Great. And then you had touched upon it a little bit earlier about the Beta Passport public mobile launch for data transparency. When is the actual release date for that?
We don't have a specific date yet, but our goal is in March. We are going, and Brandon will jump in right after I finish the framing with more specifics. But we have already sort of scoped out from our end what data we want to put up there as a first sort of phase, what it will look like, making sure that it's secure. And Brandon and his team are already interacting with OT, what was formerly Do It, on all of the normal processes of security accreditation. So I think it's happening, we're very close, but I'll let Brandon, if you don't mind, Chair, jump in.
Sure, thanks, Director Flores. So yeah, that is pretty much it. We're working with any major release, especially a public-facing application. We want to make sure that the data is secure and that the application is secure. And so we're going through a security accreditation process with our cybersecurity representatives at OTI, as Director Flores mentioned, in addition to performance testing the application to make sure that it can withstand, the highest levels of traffic. And so we're really excited about this beta launch, and the data that we're going to include has aggregate metrics that we haven't really been able to publish in the past, because we haven't had the data that we've had in Passport being collected in the past. And so we're excited about that. So you'll see a bunch of graphs and charts and metrics that we care about and think are important based on conversations we've heard. Plus, you'll have direct access to in progress and registered contracts that are going through Passport, vendors that have filed in Passport, and their MWBE certification status, as well as what's already public now, which is business opportunities, the RFPs that we actually showed you yesterday.
Great. Lisa, I know that we were talking about, especially from the Joint Controller/Mayor Task Force report, about contract stat as one of the recommendations to track performance of the agencies. To me, it sounds like the Beta Passport public mobile launch is very similar in idea. Is that the same concept that you're trying to recommend, or are these two different platforms that you are recommending?
So we day one, as Brandon and Ryan can tell you, when I walked in the door, was sort of a number of big picture things, where we have to go and where our posture has to be daily, right? Our posture has to be daily, enhancing equity and diversity. It also has to be about transparency and accountability and access. And so day one, we said we have all this data. We have to put data out there. And it's part of our building our relationship of trust with the public, of putting information out there and being held accountable. So the beta is sort of the information thus far that we believe will be important as a starting point, but not separate or apart from the controller and the mayor's office joint task force output. So as we work with the controller's office on identifying KPIs, we intend to then build that into this online visual data visualization that we're now calling Passport, a beta version. But we're going to continue to iterate, and that's what we're really excited about. It's not going to be static, and we're going to learn through this process not only with the task force, but with other sort of activities related to procurement reform that will inform iterating on that tool.
Okay, got it. And then do you have any additional features that you have scheduled to be added to Passport and that hasn't been already scoped for the major release that is that you have shared?
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
but Brandon, if there's something I missed, please, by all means, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of major enhancements, that's pretty much what's on our roadmap for the next year, from now until March 2023, and we're really we have releases along the way that will encompass what you saw in that functionality.
Brendan or Lisa, since not everyone on this hearing has seen the document with the next release, do you mind listing the major enhancements or features for everyone?
Absolutely, Chair. Brandon, do you mind?
Yeah, sure, no problem, Chair Wan. So we have a number of features, primarily the vendor contract budget is a big functionality that's public or vendor facing that we're excited about, which will allow vendors to import the contract fee schedule and manage the budget in conjunction with the agency. So that's one huge one. We're also looking at improving visibility for subcontractors and on-time payments. So this is, again, something we've heard directly from our vendor community, in particular MWBEs, is trying to have the citywide application support addressing any late payment issues. And so one thing we want to do is be able to capture subcontractor payments in the system at an individual level by the prime vendor, and also notify subcontractors when the prime vendor is getting paid. And in addition to that, we have some internal sort of agency-facing upgrades that include onboarding rotational task orders, making some of our integrations real time, so our ordering process is quicker, and improving our ordering functionality to allow for spot pricing with fuel purchasing.
And I think, thank you, Brandon. And I think I would just add, if I may, Chair, that what I think is really important is that, you know, some of the information that Brandon sort of summarized, that's a result of all the input and feedback that we've received, right, from vendors and from agencies. And in terms of scoping work beyond that, where we are right now of really wanting to sort of blow up the procurement rules, make sure that we have standardization, make sure that we're thinking about construction and capital reform in technology procurement, and the output of the Joint Task Force, is that it's prudent for some of those activities to get further along in the processes, because it will inform that there might be a lot of changes in the rules that would potentially allow us to scope out new releases. So I think that important hard work needs to be done over the next few months before scoping out new releases. But I suspect that there will be new releases that get scoped that are necessary and exciting after some of that hard, sort of nerdy procurement work is done over the next few months.
Great. Does Passport currently allow for the submission of multiple amendments to the same contract at the same time?
Excellent question, Chair. So when you asked earlier about some of like the pressure points, you know, it's amendments. I definitely think is one of them, and it's from all sides, right? I mean, agencies are often tasked with, you know, they're already so far along in their procurement, and then there are add-ons to a particular program, and they have to do an amendment before they even got the last amendment registered. And a lot of that really has to do with sort of the process that hasn't been in place, and with the city's financial management system that's sort of been the practice for many, many, many decades of not being able to do multiple amendments at the same time. You have to finish one, register one, and then start the next one. However, I will say that there is functionality in Passport to sort of shoot off multiple amendments at the same time. It's not turned on right now because we don't have the equivalent sort of in the rest of the process to be able to do that to registration. But this is something that I know Deputy Comptroller at the Bureau of Contract Administration, Charlotte Management, is also really excited about looking into. We've already begun sort of having conversations about whether or not there's an opportunity from a technical perspective to change that. So we're at the beginning stages of those conversations, but that's something that would be a game changer for citywide not just for the non-for-profit sector, but all expense contracts, and would be something that I think both the controller's office and the mayor's office would be really proud of if we can achieve that, because that has been the bane of city's existence for many, many, many years.
Okay, so this isn't current, even though the functionality is there, it's not turned on. And could we expect that for release 5 or 6 or not yet?
Yeah, so it's not really about what's scoped in Passport. It's really about what
Gotcha.
does the city's procurement system can it handle, right? And how do we need to make any changes to FMS, or is it just policy changes? And a lot of that, really hasn't been talked through in the past ever. So I want to be cautiously excited that the fact that we're even having this conversation with the controller's office and FISA is like a huge first step. So I don't want to overpromise, but it's not something that's currently scoped because we already have the functionality. The much, much harder work is doing all the work with the controller's office and city agencies and FMS to see if it can even be done.
Got it. Does Passport currently support all PPB procurement methods and items that require registration? And if not, why and by when are they expected to be included?
So I let Brandon and Ryan jump in. I just say, there's definitely non-PBB registration actions that are not in Passport yet. And part of that decision, I think when you're doing any system, it's sort of bang for buck. And, in terms of the city's procurement portfolio versus some of the non-procurement actions that do get registered, the focus, my understanding at the time that the project was originally scoped, was to be inclusive of sort of the major dollar value, which was the procurement methods. But since if Ryan or Brandon have anything to add, please do.
Yeah, that's right. We have all the methods subject to the PPP rules that would be considered procurement transactions. There are a small number of types of transactions that would be categorized as non-procurement transactions, such as a grant. So that those are not in Passport.
Okay. Is MOX able to compare the cycle time of procurement solicited via Passport with those procured prior to system implementation? We've heard from agencies that it takes longer to release a solicitation and a proposal evaluated in Passport as compared to prior system implementation.
So I would say that, a system, a procurement system, and I say system in quotations, that was done in paper or in a document workflow system, not an end-to-end procurement system, is not really a one-for-one if you're looking at sort of cycle time or other data points. And I'll just give you an example, because it's a pressure point that the city vendors have struggled with, and definitely struggled with before HHS Accelerator and Passport when it comes to payment. For prior to Passport and prior to Accelerator, the rules require that you get paid 30 days, within 30 days or less after you submit an invoice to the city. And it's that 30 days is based on something that's called an invoice received in, IVR date. What used to happen in the past is, if I was a vendor and I submitted my invoice to you in an envelope, it went through through all your processes, and then you got it, your mailroom, and then you got it and you put it on your desk, right? Until you could have left it on your desk, went on vacation, came back 2 weeks later, you open it and then you stamp it. That's when the date started, right? So it's not really a one-for-one when you're looking at time frames. When it comes to sort of how long it takes to release solicitations, I think I would just say that there's always areas for improvement, and I think now is actually the time in processes that we'll probably be making some sort of policy type of improvements that the system already supports. But much of the bulk of the functionality of Passport was released at the height of the pandemic in June 2020. And while everyone has been working, day and night, both in MOX and the agencies, to acclimate to the system, I think we just have to acknowledge that you're acclimating to a system during a pandemic. So regular change management takes a while, and change management during a pandemic and with all of the other responsibilities that folks have, I think has been a little slower than it would have been otherwise. But I don't know that we have one-for-one data specific to your question, Chair. I don't know, Ryan or Brandon, do we?
Yeah, you covered all the nuance there.
Okay,
We can
thank
provide
you.
you with all sorts of data, Chair Juan. But there's nuance to when it was in paper and the planning process that went into getting to release an RFP. If you're looking at a baseline in 2020 during the pandemic, when there was a pause on certain actions at a certain point or speeding up actions to get contracts registered, then it's not an easy one-to-one. But I do think what I'm excited about, what the sector in particular is excited about, is being able to have those data publicly available in as real time as possible, so that you can look at phase to phase, right? Like from the planning process to the award process, and looking at how long stuff takes when it's in Passport in particular. So the baseline, I think, is really happening now that we've matured past the first year or so of being live. And those data should be available for us to continue doing the work. So we're excited by that.
Great. I just have a few more questions, but I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Krishnan and Councilmember Ressler have also joined. Thank you. Has MOX surveyed agencies and vendors to solicit feedback on the success of the system and assess the need for further enhancements directly from the agencies? I know that you were saying that you have surveyed, you have an optional survey once you call the help desk, but has there been a separate survey that has gone out directly to the agencies and all the vendors?
So I say for agencies, there was a process, I believe, in the end of the last administration, to sort of regroup with some of the agencies in particular, I think on the capital side, of getting their input to inform some of the releases that are upcoming. And as I said earlier, you know, in the transition in a new administration, I've charged the staff with sort of reopening that process with our agencies. So it's the announcements probably being made as we speak to the agency procurement leaders that's being held right now on a monthly basis, that in the next few weeks we're going to be starting having those meetings again with agencies around the same industry, of getting their feedback on sort of their experience and sort of issues that they've had, and sort of updates or changes that they would like. And the reason why it's really important to do that, in my opinion, in sort of clusters of agencies with the same industry portfolio, is that there are a lot of processes that still exist at agencies that are very specific to their agency. In some cases, it may be they have a very specific portfolio or their funding structure that requires them, or they believe that requires them to have a wholly separate, you know, system that they run for certain tracking processes, for example. In other cases, their agencies, they built a system internally 10+ years ago, and they really like it, and it feels safe and it feels comfortable, and they want Passport to do every single thing that their legacy system does, and we all know that there's sort of a middle ground there, right? You know, in moving forward in technology, it's not necessarily having a one-for-one for every single thing your legacy system has, if especially it doesn't necessarily have utility for the rest of the city as it relates to completing transactions required by the PBB rules. So we're actually really excited to engage with agencies in the upcoming weeks, and we expect robust feedback. But again, I think we are very open as it relates to the vendors of having other opportunities to engage. And you know, you obviously have ideas, and others in the committee. And I said, I think right now is a perfect time for us to do that, because we want to be in the gathering stage right now.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to see a general survey go out, because you have the contact information of all their email addresses as well, like even a digital survey to collect feedback. And then for my next question, could you share the complete cost breakdown of Passport per fiscal year from release 1 to release 4. So that's from August 17th to June 2021.
Yes, we can provide that too. And I know, I think we received that question yesterday. I can rattle off some of the numbers to you, but we have something prepared that we can send to you right after the hearing.
Okay, and then also the estimated expected cost for the future releases. as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll have that prepared. We have that prepared and sent to you after the hearing today.
Perfect. And then also, how much were the cost savings that were recovered from sunsetting the older systems, Vandex, DCAS Director Order, APT, HHS Accelerator, including the RFP and pre-qualifications? Do you have that ready as well to share with us?
I don't have that in front of me, and so if I may, Chair, I think it's a really excellent question. I'm not familiar of whether or not in the past administration that analysis was done. So if you would afford me the opportunity to get back to you later today to let you know if that exists or not, I apologize. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, no problem. And then what can we, I know for release 5 and 6, it was posted or was listed that there's an iValua platform upgrade coming. Can you share what is part of that upgrade for the platform?
Sure. I'll start and then hand it off to Brandon. You know, some of it is, as you know, every software has normal sort of upgrades, and we were in the midst of releasing so much functionality over the last few months and years that part of it is just catching up to some of those normal software updates that we sort of paused so that we could push out a lot of functionality, especially the sourcing release 3 that was a huge heavy lift, and not sort of conflate or have conflict with those two happening at the same time. But I definitely would, Brandon can explain it in more detail.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Director Flores. So a lot of the functionality is module based in the platform application. I mentioned the product is iValua, that's sort of behind Passport, and they do these large scale releases, sometimes twice a year, sometimes quarterly, that we get, and it's an update to our instance. So some of the features, some of the things actually echo some of the questions that you had, or answer some of the questions you had too. You know, they're constantly doing usability testing and accessibility heuristics, and so some of it in these latest releases is going to be around semantic UI. So we'll be able to see sort of a refreshed UI UX type of experience. There's opportunities to accept and features that are in these platform releases or not, because it's what they call a single tenant software instance, which allows us to review each of these features and decide how to either adopt it or not include it. So some of that will be on the sourcing module. There's opportunities to use AI around automating contract clauses from our lexicon. I'm not sure, that's something we want to pursue, as I mentioned, but it is something that will be offered and available. In addition, there's a ton of security updates that go along with improving the base code.
Got it. That sounds great. I look forward to it. I don't have any further questions, but I will follow up for cost savings as well as the complete cost breakdown. And then I know that in the briefing that you shared with me, you shared some of the outputs and achievements for June 2022. And I would love to see, June 2020. And I would love to see all of the increase in solicitations, contract amendments as well, if you have that data, because I think that would be a huge victory for Passport.
Sure, we can provide updated data. Absolutely.
Okay. Great, and I will turn it back to Alex to moderate for additional questions from council members.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call on council members in the order that they have used the Zoom raise hand function. Council members who are present, if you would like to ask a question and you have not used the Zoom raise hand function, please do so now. Council members, you will have a total of 3 minutes to ask your questions and to receive an answer from the panelists. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer and will let you know when your time is up. Once I have called on you, please wait until the Sergeant has announced that you may begin before asking your questions. Seeing no council members with their hands raised. Oh, there we go. Councilmember Lee.
Your time will begin.
The Sergeant's call time.
Okay, hi, thank you.
Your time will begin.
Thank you, Chair Juan, as well as folks from MOX. I was very involved in the nonprofit resiliency committee, as well as the reiteration. I remember being in the room when you guys first rolled out Passport to us. And so was there when Mike O was first starting to talk about this whole transition. I feel like Michelle Jackson could just tell us everything about the history. But I just wanted to reiterate some of the points that Chair Juan had brought up, because as being a former nonprofit social service provider myself, having contracts with DYCD, DIFTA, DOHMH, you name it, it was very frustrating for us. And I agree with the sentiment that I think it has less to do about the system itself and more about the procurement process, which has a lot of the holdups. And so I just wanted to first thank you for all the efforts, because I know that this is years in the making. And from the contractor side, for us as providers, it has been easier in terms of having everything in one place. But that being said, I think my question is sort of a multi-part question, which I know is probably not going to get answered in 3 minutes, but it's really around how do we standardize, which has been brought up, because, for example, even the percentage of indirect costs across different agencies and contracts varies, right? And then the requirements are very cumbersome, especially for smaller nonprofits. And so I had a question around whether MOX would, or what efforts have been made so far to potentially differentiate between dollar amount contracts. So the requirements that are for $5,000 contracts versus $100,000, can we lessen the burden? And to be honest, I think that would help in getting more MWBE vendors in the system. And so is there a way to do that? And then also, is there a way to change the procurement system so that we could add points for vendors, city agencies that are providing contracts for minority groups or marginalized communities that serve language specific or culturally specific organizations and communities. And I'm glad to hear that you mentioned about the subcontractors. We were often the subcontractors. So it was hard for us to get clarity on where that process was, because we had no clue. So I'm glad to hear that. And I think my main question is, can we use Passport as a way to also hold agencies accountable? And what's the process to go back to that? Because I gotta say, we were required to use Passport. And then when we asked our city agencies, they were still not up to date with the Passport system. And so there's a big disconnect happening. And I feel like there has to be a way to also hold city agencies accountable as well. Because right now, for example, I gotta say the fact that a lot of the senior centers don't have any contracts in place, like who's responsible for that and how is that being held accountable? Like that to me is a travesty. I can't believe that there are agencies and nonprofits that don't have contracts in place, but are being asked to provide services. So I will leave it at that for now, because my 3 minutes is up.
Well, thank you, Council Member, and congratulations. Really excited to work with you, and all great observations, experience, and feedback and questions. So I'll try to do my best to get through as many as I can. In terms of burden on vendors, absolutely. There are still too many burdens and barriers to doing business with the city, and whether you're a small not-for-profit, grassroots not-for-profit, a small business, MWBE, it's too difficult. And in some cases, especially when it comes to MWBEs, they decide not even to get certified because it's too much. They feel like it's too much work for little output on the ends. So while we haven't talked about it yet, but something that next few months that our office is going to be working on is, and this administration I think made it very clear in not just my appointment, but the appointment and creation of a new Office of Risk Management and Compliance, and that we will be working very closely together. And how do we? And part of what we plan on working on together, in addition to other city partners. How do we look at, now that we have so much data, how do we identify what really are the flags or the factors that cause risk in procurement? And risk, I say that in multiple ways, whether it's we ask for all this documentation related to vendor integrity, there should be a way for us to be more laser focused and precision focused when it comes to do we need to cast a wide net, or can we cast a smaller net and let the other ones go through with minimal documentation? There's also sort of a risk factor as it relates to the type of projects that may go over budget or over time. So that's really detailed work that my office, the Office of Risk Management Compliance, probably the CTO, and how do we mine the data, looking at other municipalities and best practices, and sort of have a risk framework that passes muster with DOI, the law department, and that's going to be a slow going process, but something that I think is really important for the sustainability of New York City procurement long term, and really would have lasting impacts on multiple sectors and the prosperity of the city. When it comes to sort of accountability, I could not agree with you more. In my my past seat, some may know that I was all about sort of issuing data about performance to hold the city accountable, and that has not changed as I sit in this seat. Part of putting information out there and being transparent, again, is to hold us accountable, right? And I say us, the city. So I think you're going to see more and more sort of data that comes out from our office that aims to achieve that in part, and also in the work that we're going to be doing with the controller and task force in identifying a sort of agreed upon, again, KPIs that will, and also you may have seen in the report, developed a structure around timeframes and timelines as well, that really in the next few months and ongoing is going to start to really shape procurement in the city very differently than it has been thus far. And lastly, on that point, our office does work closely with agencies on their timeliness, and we are, stepping that up, day one since January. So, for example, contracts that are human service contracts that need to continue for the next fiscal year, starting 7/1. We've already met with the ACOs last month, gave them sort of a journey map of expectations of when they should achieve certain parts of the process. And we run data and send that out weekly. And we've just started to send it to the deputy mayors as well, so that everyone is accountable and seeing the progress or lack of progress, so that we can all work towards achieving timeliness. So, and there were a lot of other things I think in your comments that I would love to, in a separate time, perhaps set up the time to meet with you and talk about it in more detail. I'd love to have more of your feedback with additional time to talk through it and see where you have ideas that we may have not mentioned thus far.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. I will now turn it to Councilmember Brewer for questions.
Your time will begin.
Thank you very much, and what a great discussion. As somebody who just came from the DOI commissioners hearing and somebody who's going to be focused a little bit on this issue, what is the trigger? Because obviously it's public money, part of the reason why we have so much paperwork. We don't want anybody to do something that's illegal, but you always worry. So what is the trigger? Because obviously more paperwork means hopefully less corruption, but on the other hand, we want it to be streamlined. So it's a hard, fine line.
Yeah.
And I just want to, in your experience, how do we do that line, or are there ways that we can look at it differently?
Thank you, Councilmember. Really look forward to working with you and all of your amazing experience and background. So I mean, first I will say that part of the hard work that we anticipate working on with our agency partners and extend to the controllers as well is identifying what are those triggers that everyone believes are the correct triggers, the correct flags, because we want to mitigate risk without slowing down the process, right? Nothing we do can have the impact of slowing the process down any further than it has been thus far, right? So that we can't have. But and as you mentioned, something that I think is a frustration for all of us, in that in some cases we have been asking for a lot of paperwork, and you still have some that sort of quote unquote slipped through, right? That there are issues, right? So I think with putting more resources, for example, into the post-audit activity, those are required, but it's not necessarily resourced and part of an agency and the city's consistent processes. Whether that's auditing around invoicing, auditing around programs, in a way that, again, is manageable and not onerous to city agencies or to vendors. And if you're catching issues in that process that you can address, and in some cases address it in a way that the vendor can maintain being a vendor with the city, because you're providing the appropriate resources and capacity building, and not just to nick someone. I think that's an area that we're really excited to focus on and dig into. And I think also, now that Passport has been functional as it relates to procurement actions for almost 2 years, and with the city's and the mayor's vision of sort of how do we use data in a more mature way than we have in the past, when the CTO is, there are other sources of data that can inform our strategic sourcing decisions that we don't currently use. So it's not just about adding more, it's about using what's out there more effectively. So again, I think, we want to work closely with those who are experts in all of these fields to come up with, and we'll soon probably start some of our working groups that we've identified. But we want this to be an informed process. If it's not, I think, again, we don't want unintended consequences.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. If any other council members have questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function now. If not, we can turn it back to Chair Wan for some additional questions.
Lucky me. We had a few more questions. Now that the system is up and running for the last several years, have you been able to utilize Passport to identify where logjams are occurring?
Yeah, I mean, I think great question. Yeah, we have a sense with the data that we have thus far of some of the areas where there are log jams in the sort of phases of procurement. And, over the next few weeks and months, again, I think collaboratively with our partners and with the Comptroller's office, sort of dig down into those sort of subcategories to identify solutions for those log jams. But I also want to say, and I'll give you an example, because I think this is why a collaborative effort is very important, and an informed process, that sometimes it may take longer, for example, in the planning stage of procurement. And on its face, absent any other information, the data may suggest that phase takes a long time. We want to make sure that as we're identifying solutions to the longer periods of the phase of the procurement process, we're thinking of the appropriateness of the industry, the contract and the procurement, and the agency portfolio. Because if you're doing a brand new client services program in a community, you may want to take more time in the planning stage of that procurement in order to have, grassroots engagement with the community, allow time for input for the community that's not just perfunctory, but you're actually listening and potentially making changes to the program model. And so it may actually be appropriate to take more time at certain phases of the procurement. But now that we have the data, I think the next step, again, with our partners, is going to be digging down and identifying sort of appropriate ranges and appropriate solutions.
Okay, great. Then a question that I had when I was reviewing yesterday on the demo, how does the vendor tell the difference between when you have a gray circle on the milestone on whether they failed to initiate a necessary step or they're just not applicable for that step? How do you tell
It's
the
a great
difference?
question, and I'm definitely going to punt it directly over to Brandon.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So there is a, we didn't click on it yesterday, but there is a tooltip that explains how the award milestones works and also links to our external user guidance and documentation. But yeah, not applicable would be gray, pending would be orange, and green is obviously completed.
Right, but in the description itself, when it's gray, it says that the help box, it actually says you have either the gray is you have failed to initiate a necessary step
Not
or you're
started.
not applicable for them. So how do you tell the difference between the two? Because maybe you failed or it's not applicable to you at all. How do you tell the difference?
Yeah. So good question. We definitely want to direct users and people to our agency guidance. But I think we could work with you or others to try to make that more clear if there's an opportunity to do that.
And Chair, I think, I really appreciate you raising that. And as I mentioned, I sort of alluded to before, we're doing beginning to do that, and we'll continue to do that really in earnest over the next few weeks, and with engaging with agencies of looking at processes, not just the procurement process, but sort of the engagement and interaction in Passport, and where there's opportunities for us to sort of re-up either trainings for agencies or vendors, and or modules or tools that inform them, of the procurement process or next steps. So I think now that we've had so many procurements go through Passport, it's actually a good opportunity for us, not just from the vendors, but from the agencies as well, to ensure that we're providing at the point they are in the phase more information that is a easy to use tool, so they can decipher what they need to do, what they've done, and what comes next.
Okay. Brian, Brandon, are you conducting user testing at all?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question, Chair One. So with each of our major releases and with our interim smaller maintenance releases, we conduct a series of user testing that will typically involve agency personnel and, depending on the functionality, vendor personnel as well.
I don't have any other questions.
Okay, Chair. Well, if you're done with questions for the administration, we can move on to public testimony, provided no additional members have questions. Oh, I see CM Wrestler. Councilmember Wrestler has raised his hand. You can turn it to him.
The time will begin.
Could you unmute me? Oh, good. Sorry about that. Sorry. Just one of those days in transit. The L train isn't running because somebody got stabbed. So we're here in a taxi on our way to City Hall. But hopefully that person's all right. Thank you, Director Mox and Ryan and the team for joining us. And thank you, Chairwoman Wan. It's great to be at your first hearing. Very exciting and great work. The question I had, and I know that Chair Wan pushed on this, but if you could just help synthesize for me, what will it take for us to get all agencies kind of fully up to speed, including DOE? And when do you think that will happen by? And should we be, releasing information on their progress to kind of do some gentle shaming on kind of how they are doing in fully adopting Passport? I know firsthand it can be hard to get our procurement teams at our agencies to move from the status quo, but we got to make it happen, and would welcome your input or guidance on what kind of on the timelines to expect and what we can do to expedite them.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember, for your question. Very sorry, terrible news we just mentioned. Hopefully, the person in the incident is safe. So you ask a great question, and that's sort of part of the challenge of both making sure that we're providing the appropriate functionality for agencies and also for agencies to be moving at the correct pace in sort of change management and adoption to being on Passport. And that is why you see in the not-for-profit task force recommendation that is specifically one of the recommendations. So well, I definitely appreciate your what might have been in jest, sort of, is it shaming? I do think there's an opportunity for us to work with, it was not in jest. I do think there's an opportunity for us, as we're collaborating with the controller's office and the implementation of these recommendations, to have a feedback loop with the council on sort of where we are and how we're doing, both where we are achieving those implementation tasks, but also to the extent that we can provide information about agency adoption and the needs of the system. I think it's going to be partly, at least in the near future, a constant dialogue. And they're really, I mean, again, I'm not suggesting that, again, a system or a tool is the panacea to solve all procurement problems, but we definitely have a little ways to go when it comes to some agencies fully adopting and using the system to the extent that's available.
I hear you, and I think our procurement, I'll just say the inefficiency of our procurement system is deeply frustrating to all of us, but I think we have something that works in Passport, and we should be more aggressive about setting benchmarks and milestones for agencies to fully adopt. And if we need to be releasing information on their progress publicly to put some pressure on them, I think it would be healthy. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I definitely, I know the time is up, but I definitely, we will follow up with your office. And again, I think we're at the time now where we're doing KPIs and we're having this thinking happening right now. I'd love to continue the conversation after the hearing, get your thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler. We will now move to Councilmember Krishnan for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Director Flores, too, and I appreciate the testimony today and the hearing as well. As someone who has used Passport before and seen it evolve over time too, I'm glad to be having this conversation and really thinking through ways to make it better. So I want to thank Chair and Councilmember One in particular for having this hearing today too, and to all my colleagues who are on as well. My question in particular is, I think that it's having Passport is important, and the improvements to it too are critical to make sure the less onerous and bureaucratic it is on nonprofits, the much easier, as you know, it will be to ensure reimbursements are made. On that vein, one of the issues that comes up in particular, and we know it too about the delays in contract registration, that I wanted to raise is, as I understand it, or have from experience seen, on some contracts, but not all, but on some at least, MOX advances 25% of the grant for organizations to use. But 25%, especially when the contract registration delays can be so long too, but 25% for many organizations will cover at a maximum 1/4 of payroll, if even that. And especially if it's a large organization, it doesn't cover that. And then that's kind of all you can do and all you can tap into as an organization. And I'd asked to see if MOX has given any thought to reevaluating the contract advances to make sure that, especially given the way things are right now, that more money is advanced to organizations and they can tap into it earlier too to actually make payroll. So they don't, often what happens is organizations have to borrow from other foundations and interest rates to make pay.
Yep. Thank you very much for your question, Council Member. And so I think I will say, just as a way of background and context, that the advance opportunity is one, not administered by MOX, but more importantly, that came to fruition after many, many, many years of advocacy, and it continues to sort of iterate, right? So in the Bloomberg administration, there was an effort, the not-for-profit sector, that to work with the administration on certain issues. And the output of that was a standard human services contract, which didn't exist before, that include the opportunity to receive an advance. And as you may know, in the past, you actually had to, the process to receive advances was not automatic after registration, and through the work of the Nonprofit Resiliency Committee, during COVID, some of that was changed to sort of automatic advances. So having said that, I think, it's something that we heard through the not-for-profit task force. And I think it would be something, if all parties sort of wanted to reopen that discussion, it's something that the city definitely could consider. But I think
Time has expired.
what's more important, and that we really have to focus on, is what's causing the need for the advance. And what's causing the need for the advance is late registration. So, I want to make sure that in the near future and in our collaboration with the Comptroller's Office and all stakeholders, that goal number one is to get your contract registered on time. And if we solve that problem and we make big progress on that issue, then the normal 25% advance automatic will flow normally, and we won't have the same pressures that you have experienced and that not-for-profits have experienced for many years.
Thank you. And I look forward to working on that with you, and hope we can also look at, in the meantime, reevaluating how much gets advanced as well to make it easier for nonprofits too.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Krishnan. Seeing no additional councilmember hands raised, we will now move to the public portion of the testimony. I'd just like to thank the team from Mox for coming on and offering their testimony today. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so
I'd like
much.
to remind, thank you. I'd like to remind everyone that, unlike in our typical council hearings, we will be calling individuals one by one to testify. Due to the large number of witnesses who have signed up to testify today, we will be limiting each panelist's speaking time to 3 minutes. Please begin once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the Zoom raise hand function, and we will call on you after the panelist has completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the sergeant at arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeants to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. At this time, I would like to welcome Charlotte Hamanjian to testify, followed by Michelle Jackson and then Taylor Palmer. Ms. Hamanjian, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Your time will begin now.
Good afternoon, and thank you to Chair Juan and the entire Contracts Committee and committee members for the opportunity to submit testimony on behalf of New York City Comptroller Lander on Passport, the city's technology tool for sourcing and contracting for goods and services. My name is Charlotte Hamanjian, and I am the Deputy Comptroller for the Bureau of Contracts and Procurement. For some context, the Comptroller's Office registered over 15,000 contract actions in fiscal year 21, representing over $31 billion in contract value for the city's mayoral agencies, affiliated agencies, elected officials, and council. As the last step in the procurement process, we often bear witness to the consequences of earlier inefficiencies. Delays and cumbersome steps in the process wreak havoc on cash-strapped vendors, particularly nonprofits, MWBEs, and small businesses who are providing critical goods and services in support of our communities. As a former ACO at multiple agencies and someone whose entire professional career has been working in New York City procurement, I can personally attest to the gains made by digitizing parts of the procurement process that were archaically still in paper until only too recent. In 2017, the first release of Passport, known as Vendor Management, transformed how vendors submit information as part of a system previously referred to as Vendex. It is used by agencies to ensure that they contract with vendors that have the requisite business integrity to be awarded public dollars. This made it easier for vendors, but also more efficient and quicker for the city by eliminating a backlog of mocks fueled by the submission of sometimes hundreds of pages in hard copy by just a single vendor. It also allowed for agencies and vendors to more efficiently and transparently manage the evaluation process, which is key to city agencies tracking performance. As a participant in a 2014 city task force aimed at improving the capital procurement process, it was also fantastic to see the implementation of some of those recommendations into Passport that reduced redundancies across agencies and further reduced cycle times. Since that time, more sourcing functions have launched in Passport that address the lack of an end-to-end system capturing all phases of the procurement from inception to controller registration. As conceived, Passport has the intention of streamlining and making it more efficient. We released earlier this week an action memo jointly with the mayor's administration, a better contract for New York, a joint task force to get nonprofits paid on time. While aimed at the significant challenges that our nonprofit partners face, these recommendations form the basis of procurement reform applicable to all vendors. And the Bureau of Contract Administration welcomes these recommendations, and we look forward to working with our agency partners, particularly MOX, to streamline the registration process for vendors while ensuring accountability and oversight. And while Passport has yielded some significant improvement, there's more work to be done, and we're happy to be at the table to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Memjian. If any council members have questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function now. Seeing no questions from the council, we will now move on to our next panelist. The next panelist will be Michelle Jackson, followed by Taylor Palmer, followed by JT Falcone. Ms. Jackson, you may begin when the sergeants call the time.
Your time will begin now.
Thanks so much, and thank you to Chair Juan, and welcome to some new and familiar faces on the New York City Council, and to the most exciting committee in all of City Council, the Committee on Contracts. Welcome, fellow procurement nerds. I'm so happy to see be joined by so many friends in this area. So I'm Michelle Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Services Council. We represent about 170 human service organizations in New York City that do everything from senior services to mental health services to homeless services and everything in between. And we really focus on the relationship between government and human service providers. Our members are overwhelmingly funded by city contracts. And so everything we've already talked about today are the groups that are most impacted by the contracting process and the Passport system. So I will submit my written testimony. So I'll just give you a couple of highlights and then I'm happy to answer questions. I think first, we are really thrilled to have a robust committee on contracts with the City Council and really appreciate, Chair Juan, the conversation you've already started and the attention to detail that you're paying and also to see so many City Council members who have experience on the nonprofit side of like actually using this system. And then also really delighted to have our Director of MOX be Lisa Flores, who has been on both sides of the contracting process and has been a great champion of the nonprofit sector, both in her role at MOX and then at the Comptroller's office and then back at MOX. So we're really thrilled to see her in this role, along with Ryan Murray, who's really I spent summers with building the HHS accelerator system. So they really know what they're doing. So really highlights of my testimony are we're really HSC and our members were thrilled at the announcement of the joint task force between the Comptroller and the Mayor. It's really historic and very impressed with the recommendations, not just as recommendations, but there's a lot of accountability there to identify the kind of systemic problems that the procurement process has had. We fully support recommendations around timeframes and contracting, and we'll be pushing that. You'll hear a lot from us around that. And the fact that Passport needs to be end-to-end. It needs to encompass the Comptroller's office as well, and providers and the public need to have visibility throughout the process. We're also supportive of the idea of coming up with key performance indicators and timeframes, but I will say we cannot wait for those. So it can't be years while we design and figure out what those are. It really needs to be months so that providers are not left waiting. There are other changes to Passport, which I think Director Flores really outlined. So I won't go through those except to say we fully support better agency training and things like that. We also think MOX really needs to be resourced and able to do this work so that they have the right team and ability to do it. And the last thing I'll just say is that we're really worried. Accelerator was built and fixed the system. The Nonprofit Resiliency Committee made headway in fixing the system. And then the system broke, probably worse than it's ever broken during the pandemic. So I would just highlight the conversation around training agency staff and making sure that there's accountability, that the deputy mayors, that you all as a committee, that there's a lot of accountability and holding of feet to the fire to make sure the system is only as good as the people who use it and push the buttons. And we learned that during the pandemic, and our providers still have procurements from 3 years ago that they're waiting to get registered, not even paid on. And now you can see it all in Passport, and it's been a real failure of the system, and we appreciate the efforts that are being made, and we think we're on the right track. But I just wanted to highlight like kind of the crisis that we've all inherited here that needs to be addressed, and that we can't wait years for those solutions. So I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. If anybody has a question from the council members, please use the Zoom raise hand function now. Seeing no questions, we will now move on to our next panelist.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Taylor Palmer, followed by JT Falcone, and then Richard Burton. Ms. Palmer, you may begin when the sergeant's call time.
Your time will begin now.
Good afternoon, Chair Wan and member of the Contracts Committee. Thank you for holding today's hearing on this very important topic. My name is Taylor Palmer, and I work for the American Council of Engineering Companies of New York, also known as ACEC New York. We're the voice of New York's consulting engineering community and represent nearly 300 firms that employ 30,000 professionals in New York. By the way, Chair Wan, 4 of our members are actually located in District 26. Our members provide professional design services to public agencies, so we design the city's infrastructure. Firms work with New York City DEP, DOT, DDC, SCA, NYCHA, and many others. And our members work on schools, housing, roads, bridges, coastal protection systems to deliver a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. It's no secret, though, that inefficient procurement processes have plagued the city for far too long. Unacceptable delays in contract and change order registration and delays in payment are commonplace and fall disproportionately on our smaller member firms and on emerging MWBE companies. These firms are effectively making interest-free loans to the city, and they can't afford it. The city can't afford to shrink the number of engineers willing to provide services at a time when infrastructure needs are so great. New York is on the verge of receiving a once-in-a-lifetime investment of federal funds from the infrastructure bill, and we need the mayor and the city council to act now to ensure that these projects can go forward. We recommend the following. On Passport, to publish and use Passport's data to increase transparency and share the status of the procurement process with engineering professionals and hold agencies accountable for their performance. Second, to allow engineers flexibility to submit graphics on RFP proposals. For design professionals, text submitted through Passport can only do so much. In other words, a picture speaks 1,000 words when it comes to designing a bridge or another piece of infrastructure. On contract and change order registration, this should be for contract registration should be completed within 60 days and change order registration within 30 days. COVID showed us that the city can act in a timely manner when needed, and we need this mentality for all contracts all the time, not just during emergencies. In contrast to the city, the federal government prohibits continuing work on projects until change orders are properly registered. However, the city routinely expects its engineering professionals to continue work without having any idea of when they could submit an invoice and get paid. For payment processing, agencies should adapt electronic invoicing ASAP and achieve payment within 30 days. This is crucial for our MWBEs and small and medium firms, and it's very harmful for them. Lastly, design build, which is a procurement method in the design and contractor community. City agencies can improve this method by using progressive design build, a specific form of design procurement used around the country as a best practice, which can be found in our testimony. ACEC New York would welcome the opportunity to work with you on your efforts. Our member firms are poised to roll up their sleeves, share their expertise, and work with you to craft solutions. Thank you so much for letting me testify, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. We'll now turn to council member questions. As a reminder to the members, if you have a question, please use the Zoom raise hand function. Seeing no questions, we'll move to the next panelist. The next panelist will be JT Falcone, followed by Richard Burton, and then Chai Junzarat. Mr. Falcone, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Thank you. My name is JT Falcone. I use them pronouns and I work with United Neighborhood Houses of New York, a policy and social change organization representing 40 neighborhood settlement houses in New York, 5 more across the state for a total membership of 45. Thank you, Chair One, for kicking it off with this really important hearing. It's exciting to have an opportunity to testify before so many people who already know all of the things that I'm about to recommend. And on top of that, I always love testifying after Michelle Jackson because I can do a hearty, that's what she said. We're good with that. For UNH, I think the thing that I would like to drill down on the most here is the importance of that agency training and benchmarks to make sure that the agency has fully integrated Passport across the system. Time and again, it's the fact that nonprofit contractors have to report across multiple systems that's causing the biggest challenge here. And the more that we get full adoption across city agencies, and also as the task force recommended in the comptroller's office, the better off we will be, and the more that we can work directly on this system. On the back end, nonprofits and agency staff, frankly, have to do multiple reports on the same items, uploading the same document over and over across Passport and legacy systems for the agencies that haven't fully adopted Passport at this point. And that's causing a lot of frustration and challenges that ultimately we don't need to deal with. And also, going back to the idea of training agency staff, which has been brought up a few times here, that could go a really long way because ultimately agency staff are people, and part of the reason that people are resistant to new technology is because they're not 100% sure how to use it. So in terms of the technological glitches that we've run into throughout the rollout, I just want to say that Mox has been extremely responsive. We've been able to connect with them, and it's good to hear the ways and strategies that they're using to ensure that they're also talking to organizations that aren't represented by umbrella groups like HSC or UNH. Because while we have firm lines of communication, it's important for them to be talking across to all of their contractors. But really, the number one thing that we should be thinking about here is ensuring that city agencies across the board adopt this system, use it fully, abandon the legacy systems so that we can all be on the same page. I know that we have a lot of work to go in terms of benchmarking what we're reporting and how we're applying across contracts. And that's something that I'm sure I'll be back here often to talk to you all about. But in the meantime, getting us all in the same system is a really achievable step one that can go a whole long way to making people's lives easier as they make other people's lives easier through the social services that they render. So I will submit written testimony, which is much more formal and well organized than the thoughts that I just threw out there, but I never like to spend my 2 minutes reading. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and looking forward to working with you often.
Thank you, Mr. Falcone. We will now move on to the next panelist. The next panelist will be Richard Burton, followed by Chai Junzarat, and then Michael Solana. Mr. Burton, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Your time will begin.
Good afternoon to Chair Wan and members of the NYC Council Committee for Contracts. I am Richard Burton, Manager of Administrative Services for Catholic Charities Community Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the accomplishments of Passport and suggest improvements that would further increase efficiency. For over 70 years, Catholic Charities Community Services has provided comprehensive professional human services to vulnerable, low-income New Yorkers. And through this program, CCS serves thousands of individuals each year without regard to race, ethnicity, gender, or religion. The city's adoption of Passport has represented an important step toward modernizing the contracting process and embracing technology to increase efficiencies. As one of the individuals who collaborated with Mox to preview and provide feedback on Passport during its development back in 2016, I am pleased with how the city has implemented our feedback. The digitalization of forms removed the need to send hand-signed documents in the mail, thereby reducing wait times and eliminating the possibility of lost documents. Being able to upload forms and having certainty as to whether documents have been received or pending has expedited the contract preparation and submission process, and has removed the wondering that came whether our documents are received. The acceptance of electronic signatures was especially helpful during the pandemic, which allowed workers to prioritize safety and still fulfilled city contracting needs. As we recognize the positive improvements, we'd like to highlight 3 issues that we've experienced that interfere with Passport reaching its full potential. The first is the inability to obtain a fully executed contract after documents have been submitted. At present, when we sign a contract electronically, we receive a single-page PDF file, which requires us to go into the system, print documents, and rescan them, which becomes cumbersome and is not efficient. Implementing a one-click solution that would allow nonprofits to download contracts in their entirety, amendments, riders, attachments, and all, would expedite record keeping and auditing procedures, and it would actually provide a value to small nonprofits that do not have the money to handle a modern contracting management platform. Secondly, Passport document upload requests do not always line up with city contracting manager processes. We have received task requests for documents that don't come from us, such as work scopes and contract attachments. And sometimes it seems like Passport might be getting ahead of the actual city contracting manager. One example of this is a request for budget detail forms, which right now come from HHS Consolidator. So ensuring that contracts and budgets are sent to us before we are given a request to complete would be very helpful. Thirdly, discrepancies in contracting naming protocols complicate contract identification and tracking efforts. Some agencies have used specific contract IDs for multiple years that we are accustomed to, but in Passport, we see these EPINs that do not really mean a lot to us. We don't have the same familiarity with them, and it causes a lot of confusion on our end. Allowing city contracting managers to add a contract ID or description somewhere in the header section and make contracting fasting. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and provide feedback to Passport. Please don't hesitate to contact me for any additional details.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We will now move to the next panelist. Next up, we have Chai Junzarat, followed by Michael Solana, and then Juan Pinzon. Mr. Junzarat, you may begin when the sergeants call the time.
The time will begin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chai Junzarat. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Vice President of Policy at Nonprofit New York. So good afternoon, Chair Juan, and members of the City Council Committee on Contracts. Similarly to JT, I co-sign a lot of what my fellow panelists have shared already. So I will be submitting a much more formal written testimony, and for the sake of time, I'll try and reinforce what people have said and then highlight some things that are specific that we're trying to focus on at Nonprofit New York. And just by way of background, we are a membership-based organization with around 1,000 nonprofit members in New York City. We're sector-wide, so our members range from arts and culture to parks to health and human services, faith, economic development, you name it. And so, similarly, our CEO, Meg Barnett, participated on the Joint Task Force. We were very excited about that and endorsed all of the recommendations coming from the Mayor's Office and the Comptroller's Office. I think one thing I'll just reiterate is that Passport, in 2021, we did a series of listening sessions with our members about the contracting process. We learned that Passport has brought some transparency to the contracting process, but the city still really has very few deadlines within their internal processes, which is making it very hard for organizations, even though they might be able to now see where their contract is, it doesn't mean that their contract is necessarily going to move forward. So like my fellow panelists, we would support and encourage the city to expand the use of timelines, such as the 30-day timeline that currently under the city charter, only the Comptroller's Office is required to process a contract within 30 days once it's delivered. Also, by way of background, I formerly used to work at OMB and I worked on the indirect cost rate policy. So definitely understand the challenges with standardizing policy across all agencies, but we continue to hear that city agencies are not implementing Passport uniformly. And that comes with a significant administrative burden on the nonprofit organizations who may have contracts with multiple city agencies. So, agencies will maintain different timelines, reporting requirements, negotiating protocols, and notarization requirements that may not be in line with Passport. So we would recommend the city further streamline and standardize application processes, documentation systems, contract management, and invoicing across all agencies, and invest in training for the workforce. What I really want to focus on today is the data piece. So data disaggregation, contracting, and also racial equity. We know that the process challenges that everybody has talked about.
Time is expired.
Oh, okay. Please see my written testimony for more on that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ginserat. Next, we will hear from Michael Solana, followed by Juan Pinzon, and then Donna Russo. Mr. Solana, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Your time will begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Solana. I am the Vice President of Finance at Volunteers of America, Greater New York, VOA GNY. We are the local affiliate of the National Organization Volunteers of America. I would like to thank Chair Juan and the members of this committee for the opportunity to submit the following testimony. VOA GNY is an anti-poverty organization that aims to end homelessness in Greater New York by 2050 through housing, health, and wealth building services. We are one of the region's largest human service providers, impacting more than 11,000 adults and children annually through 66 programs in New York City, Northern New Jersey, and Westchester County. We are also an active nonprofit developer of supportive and affordable housing with a robust portfolio of award-winning permanent supportive housing, affordable and senior housing properties, with more in the pipeline. First, we at VOA GNY would like to thank Chair Juan and this committee for holding this hearing about such a critically important topic. Over the past several months, our president and CEO, Mi-Young Lee, has participated in the task force, which this week released its report, A Better Contract for New York, a joint task force to get nonprofits paid on time. We are hopeful that this report, the change in executive leadership citywide, and the council's commitment to prioritizing this issue as evidenced by this hearing will finally mean long-awaited progress in these areas. The report outlines many issues related to Passport in the entire process, including transparency on where contract sits and the source of delays. The date stamps have been helpful, and we thank you for this recent addition to Passport. Over-reliance on contract amendments, even for the costs, which are predictable, such as cost of living adjustments and indirect cost rate changes. The overall complexity of the process leading to significant administrative burden, payment delays, putting stress on cash flow and operating needs. In addition, a big concern is the implementation without the formalized live training for end users, including the self-admitted New York City agencies not receiving training or being familiar with the system, and further explaining this will cause delays in the processing of our contracts. I believe recurring live trainings of the entire process would be beneficial for all parties to avoid delays. The issues create significant problems for our organization. VOA GNY relies heavily on government funding to provide housing for over 4,000 vulnerable New Yorkers every night and deliver services to thousands more. The procurement services, including issuance of payment owed to our organization, is far more inefficient and delayed in New York City than in our other jurisdiction of Westchester County and New Jersey with our federal contracts. As just one example, the city asked VOA GNY to open a new COVID-related shelter in May 2020, but we were not able to bill for $3 million in services rendered until the contract was registered 7 months later. Nonprofit and human service organizations like VOA. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Solana. Next, we will move to Juan Pinzon, followed by Donna Russo, and then Carlos Cano. Mr. Pinzon, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Your time will begin.
Thank you, Chair Juan, for this opportunity to testify. My name is Juan Pinzon. I'm the Director of Health Campaigns and Government Engagement at the Community Service Society of New York. CSS health programs help New Yorkers enroll into health insurance coverage, find the health care that they need, and we also help them use their coverage and access the healthcare system. We do this through a live answer helpline and through a partnership with over 50 community-based organizations throughout New York State. In this testimony, CSS urges the City Council to address the long-standing structural problems in the execution of contracts and payments by city agencies that have affected nonprofit organizations for so many years, including improvements to the passport system. CSS has contracted with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for more than 20 years to provide health insurance enrollment and post-enrollment assistance to New York City residents through initiatives like the Harlem Health Advocacy Partners, the Managed Care Consumer Assistance Program, and Access Health NYC. We value the opportunity to contract and partner with UHMH to deliver these services, but our ability to deliver these services has been hindered by recurring contract execution and payment delays that put a major strain on the finances of CSS and our partners. We have and continue to experience major delays in getting our contracts executed and receiving payments on time. Just to give you an example, for 2 of our current contracts with UHMH, we still have not received any payments for fiscal year 2021. Those contracts were actually only executed this past December, and we are still waiting for our fiscal year 2022 contracts to be executed. And I know that our partners in these programs have experienced similar delays. I would also say that delaying contract execution and payments is a major barrier to the delivery of quality of services and has an adverse effect on program sustainability. Like many organizations that contract with city agencies, CSS also has great difficulty working with the passport system. It's difficult to navigate and sends multiple unrelated emails to every staff member registered with the website, often several times a day. CSS is required to upload the same documents multiple times, and it's very difficult to communicate with the contracting city agencies about problems with passport. Organizations are required to assign roles and contract teams to our staff to authorize them to perform any tasks in passport. That process is extremely complicated, requiring multiple steps, including a request to MOCs. The definition of these roles remains unclear, and staff across the agency continue to get notifications for contracts that are unrelated to the roles. Another problem with the passport system that we urge the committee and MOCs to investigate is the accurateness of the performance evaluation that organizations receive after each grant period. The performance evaluation doesn't include information about how the score is calculated, even though CSS receives 100% scores on each individual item in the evaluation. The evaluation is incorrectly scored overall and would receive a total score of 80%. Each year we have to appeal the score and get it corrected. We are very encouraged by the steps taken by Mayor Adams, Controller Lander, and the New York City Council to finally address all these problems, especially the creation of the task force. And I believe that it's time for all New York City nonprofits to be able to focus on providing the services that residents rely on to get their healthcare, food, housing, and other social services without having to worry about getting paid. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pinzon. Next, we will hear from Donna Russo and then Carlos Cano. As a reminder, if there are any panelists whose names have not been called who have registered to testify, please use the Zoom raise hand function and we will have you added to the end of the panelist list. Ms. Russo, you may begin when the sergeants call the timer.
Yeah, time will begin.
Hello, my name is Donna Russo and I am the contracts manager for Sunnyside Community Services, a community-based nonprofit located in Sunnyside, Queens. SCS serves a diverse community of over 16,000 people throughout Queens with programs that range from pre-K to college and career readiness, home care and home health aid training, Beacon and Cornerstone community centers for children and families, a vibrant older adult center, and a full range of services for at-risk older adults, including social adult daycare for individuals with Alzheimer's. We process over 40 contracts a year. And from a contracting perspective, the move to a paperless digital contracting process through Passport was a significant process improvement. It eliminated the need to sift through hundreds of pages of paper documents, streamlined the signature process with digital signatures through DocuSign, and eliminated the need to mail paper contracts back and forth. However, with any new process, there are challenges. The largest challenge we have experienced is the significant delay in contract creation, which is the start of the contracting process in Passport. This is the case specifically with discretionary contracts. In FY21, we had several discretionary contracts that were not initiated in Passport until 4 to 6 months after the beginning of the contract year. This year, we are in the same situation. Several discretionary contracts were initiated by the funding agency just in December, We have a handful of others that are just beginning now, and some haven't even started yet. Sadly, last year, in the face of a global pandemic, when our community was relying on services more than ever, we couldn't spend $70,000 designated to us via a discretionary contract for case management services because of a lack of certainty about if and when the contract would go through. In FY20, we didn't get initial notice until November. This year, we received notice in September. Every year, it's the same situation. We received notice in the fall for programming that could have started in July in continuation from the previous year. Staff are terminated because when the discretionary is announced by June 30th, no notice is provided for case management. Vulnerable seniors have to be moved around to different social workers. This year, there was discretionary funding for $2 million for case management programs across New York City, with notice going out in September. A discretionary process that provides continuous support to the community members it is designed to serve is what is needed so that nobody experiences a gap in service. We urge the committee to connect with the council's fiscal office and the Department for the Aging so that every dollar supports older adults in their time of need. We appreciate the opportunity to share our experience with Passport and the city's contracting process, and we look forward to the efforts by the City Council and Chair Wan to improve the timeliness of the discretionary contracting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russo. We'll now move to the final panelist, Carlos Cano. Mr. Cano, you may begin when the sergeant's called the timer.
Your time will begin.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm Carlos Cano. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Urban Outbound. I appreciate the opportunity to present testimony before this committee. Urban Outbound appreciates also the trust of the city as we work to deliver essential services to our community and break cycles of poverty. The contract with the city, whether from discretionary funding or baseline services, allows to provide key services like career and college access, financial counseling, tax preparation, and worker cooperative development. However, the contract registration process poses challenges for our agency. And I'm going to echo a lot of the sentiments that my colleagues have mentioned before me. Some of the pain points that is lack of consistency. I believe we heard that earlier today. There are different formats and different rules that govern the documents, such as scopes of work and budgets that slow the process for us. The registration process itself is different from agency to agency. As the process slows down, which results in payment delays for us, this causes us to have issues with our cash flow. Also, we find that in some agencies, accounting procurement staff is not aligned with the program staff. Sometimes we hear different messages from both sides, and this ends up in being dozens of emails back and forth before we can start submitting our documents through Passport. An idea I would like to propose is including a direct communication application within Passport, so that we can communicate with our procurement counterparts directly. Maybe turn Passport a little more into a collaboration tool rather than what looks more like a Dropbox style website or platform. Also would like to propose the idea of certain documents that are common to a lot of contracts, like insurance certifications. That would be good if those could be throughout all our contracts. We contract with multiple agencies, and we find ourselves spending a lot of time uploading the same documents over and over again. We may be some tiny little differences. I know it may not seem like a lot, but when you're working in multiple contracts, time is of the essence, time that we should be dedicating to providing the services on the ground. Any process that can streamline the contract registration timeline will be will have a tremendous impact on nonprofit vendors like ourselves. And that's about, for me, I think I have a few seconds, but I'd like to end there and just thank you again for the time and for your commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Cano. We will now turn to Councilmember Holden for questions.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Donna. I have a question. I don't know if you want to divulge this, but what are the agencies that are the slowest paying that you have the biggest problems with? Because that's what we really need to focus on, the ones that are so slow and take so long that it jeopardizes your employees and obviously the services. That's Carlos or Donna. You still? Yeah. Hi, Donna. You can you unmute if you have? You want to answer that or?
Well,
go ahead, please.
well, I mean, we can't get paid until we execute the contract. So, so that's the big issue. So as an example, we are in halfway through the year, more than halfway through the year, and we still have contracts that aren't even, they're not even through the process. And there's contracts that we haven't even started yet. So like I can tell you as in another example, we didn't get a contract executed in this is discretionary. Discretionary seems to take much longer. For fiscal year 21, for one discretionary contract, I think it just got executed in December of 21. That's like how many, 4 months, 5 months after the end of the fiscal year. So, but I don't know why. I don't know, like a lot of issues were brought up and I don't know if it's training on the agency side. I don't know that part of it, but it just seems like it should be much quicker. And I know that when I get a request, my documents are uploaded immediately. And then I reach out, but I don't know what's going on the other side.
Well, since I support Sunnyside and they're great, you guys are great. I would like if you can call my office and tell me who's giving you the most trouble, what's going on. I have to know this, that my money is being spent or that my money is doing the most good for our taxpayers' money. So Donna, if you could let my office know, and please, when there is a delay, we should know. The council should know.
Mm-hmm.
And Carlos, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Just like to add, starting last year, contracts were bundled, so we had different allocations that go to the same contract. That actually has to slow the process. We appreciate that there is maybe less paperwork, but at the end, if there was an allocation that came in a transparent resolution a couple months later, we could have started that process with the first allocation much earlier. So right now we have not seen registered any single contract so far for discretionary funding for this current fiscal year yet. They were close, but we started pretty late comparatively to previous years.
So, but do any communications with these agencies? Do you get any reason why they're doing this? Either Donna or Carlos or anybody else? Do we get an explanation? Did they blame the pandemic? What's the explanation for that? Or are there no answers?
Honestly, the first communication come pretty late. We look at the Schedule C when it comes out, and we keep an eye on solutions. But it usually takes, I would say, a couple months before we hear from the agencies themselves, confirming that there was an allocation. And if we reach ahead of time, they usually ask us to wait until there is an official award letter that comes from them. And I haven't seen that happen within the first 2 months after Schedule C is published. So that already starts the process late. And then there was one agency, I can't remember which one it was, but they asked us to wait because there was a new allocation coming to a transparency resolution. So we had to wait for a new award letter before we could start the process on Passport. And by then, I think we were already in November.
Chair, I think we have somebody else have their hands up. I see a raised hand.
We'll unmute him.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just add a couple other perspectives. I think it's a great question. I'm really hopeful that Passport's transparency will allow, over time, all of us to see where the logs are, where the contract is getting held up, because I do think that from what we've heard from organizations, it's kind of unique to the agency. DIFTA sticks out from some of the interviews we did last year. But I will share, just as somebody who worked for city government on contracts, that when I was at OMB, we had no incentive to move contracts forward, and it was always somebody else's fault. We'd always blame it on not having enough information from. I worked a lot with ACS. We never had enough information from the agency. we hear that the comptroller's office had issues with details about the contract. But the fact that at OMB, when we were trying to move contracts along, we would just get an email that would say, you know, these contracts are 45 days old, please do something about them. But there was no incentive, there was no penalty for us as staff. And I think that opacity will hopefully be at least, we'll have some sunlight on that with the new transparency from Passport.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Holden. Seeing no additional councilmember hands raised and nobody else signed up to testify, we will now move to Chair for closing remarks.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I want to give special thanks to our team and especially Alex Polinoff, as well as Leah and everyone else on the Contracts Committee for all of your help, and John Russell. And I want to thank the administration that has come on to answer our questions, from the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, Lisa Flores, as well as the Deputy Director, Ryan Murray, and the General Counsel, Andy Meredith, and the Controller's team, as well as all the nonprofits and all the council members from the committee for attending today. Thank you so much for all of the information. My team will be following up, and then we will share that information with the rest of the committee as well, and for anybody else that is interested. So we look forward to seeing you